Highlights of today's Canadian Grand Prix can be seen tonight on LWT at 12:20.
Tory leadership battle begins. Widdecombe makes the first move. The final journey for America's biggest mass murderer. And Australia draw first blood in the Ashes one-day warm-ups.
From ITN, the ITV Weekend News with Mark Austin.
Good evening. Senior Tories are back in London tonight after a weekend reflecting on the Conservative election defeat and preparing the battle lines for the leadership contest. One of them, Anne Widdecombe, admitted today she would stand if she can get enough support. Here's our political correspondent, Lauren Taylor.
The first fleeting glimpse tonight of William Hague and his wife since his dramatic resignation on Friday. But while they've enjoyed a rest in Yorkshire, the race to replace him has hotted up. Anne Widdecombe made her interest clear today and hinted she would be prepared to include pro-Euro Tories such as Ken Clarke, as well as Eurosceptics if she became leader.
There are quite a lot of people who would like me to run, but that doesn't mean I can just jump in. I've got to take soundings, just see how wide the support is, consider what I've got to offer. It would be very premature to make any decisions now.
But Mr Clarke, who's been considering his options since he retained his seat, may decide to stand himself. He has the backing of senior moderate Tories who believe it's essential to move back to the centre ground. But some right-wingers like Bill Cash don't want Mr Clarke or any alliance between him and Ms Widdecombe or Michael Portillo, and insist the policy on the euro should be never.
Any attempt to cobble together some leadership on the basis that half of it wanted to be Eurosceptic and half of it wanted to be Europhile would simply collapse in disorder.
Another high-profile possible candidate, Michael Portillo, has been keeping quiet about his intentions. One likely supporter is Alan Duncan, who was a shadow trade and industry spokesman under William Hague. He hasn't ruled out standing himself if Mr Portillo decides not to run.
I think the future of the Conservative Party is not going to be bound up in temporary alliances of people. It's going to be determined by a solid agenda which appeals to millions and millions of people who in the past have found us utterly repellent.
As the Tories manoeuvre for their leadership job, here at Downing Street the ministerial positions are being finalised in the last part of the reshuffle. The Prime Minister is back here after a short break at Chequers and is expected to release the full list of junior and middle-ranking ministers tomorrow. Lauren Taylor, ITN, Downing Street.
The Europe Minister Keith Vaz, one of the junior ministers expected to lose his job in Tony Blair's reshuffle, was today readmitted to hospital. Mr Vaz is in the Leicester Royal Infirmary with an infection. His condition is described as satisfactory. Fears are growing tonight that the deaths of 3 Palestinian women killed by Israeli tank fire could unravel an already shaky ceasefire in the Middle East. As they were being buried, Israelis and Palestinians continued wrangling over the latest American peace plan. From Israel, here's John Irvine.
Now into its second week, the ceasefire looks more vulnerable than ever. This was the funeral of 3 Arab women killed by the Israelis last night. The imperfect truce that nevertheless brought several days of relative calm here hangs in the balance. The women who lived in tents died when tank shells were fired into a Palestinian refugee camp on the Gaza Strip. Israel claims the salvo was in response to shooting on an army position by 2 Palestinian gunmen. The killings will make the task of the international community all the more difficult. Various peace envoys and mediators from America, Europe and Russia have been arriving here to try to shore up the ceasefire and build on its potential. Both Yasser Arafat and the Israeli Prime Minister Ariel Sharon are being asked to make conciliatory moves, but the 2 leaders face domestic constraints that make any concessions difficult. The diplomatic initiative will intensify yet further next week with the arrival in the region of the UN Secretary-General Kofi Annan. The Israelis and Palestinians are willing to talk about peace, but there is no sign yet of the reciprocal gestures on the ground that are required to bolster a ceasefire, which at the moment looks temporary. John Irvine, ITN, Jerusalem.
The execution of America's biggest mass murderer is now just hours away. The Oklahoma City bomber, Timothy McVeigh, has been moved from his death row cell to the building where, barring last-minute interventions, he'll die tomorrow by lethal injection. From Indiana, James Mates has sent this report.
The last dawn that Timothy McVeigh will ever see. The worst mass murderer in US history has less than a day to live. Earlier this morning, he was moved from death row to the execution building. At noon, he ate his last meal. His lawyers accept there is no stopping this now.
The Attorney General could stop it if he chose. I doubt that. And Tim could ask us to file with the U.S. Supreme Court. I seriously doubt that. And so I think that this execution will go forward.
Before dawn tomorrow, he will be strapped to this gurney. At 7 a.m., he will be injected with a cocktail of 3 chemicals to obstruct his breathing and stop his heart. Hundreds of relatives and survivors will watch him die on a live video link. 6 years after the bombing, they're ready for this to be over. This will be the first time in almost 40 years that the United States government, rather than one of the states, has executed someone. It should have been a controversial moment. In fact, such was the enormity of McVeigh's crime that so far at least, this has all gone forward with very little protest. James Mates, ITN, Terre Haute, Indiana.
Family and friends of the Duke of Edinburgh held a party in Windsor Castle today to celebrate his 80th birthday. The Queen thanked him for his loyal support during their life together and then joked, "I can't believe you're 80. Our royal correspondent Libby Vina was there.
A day of celebration for the Duke of Edinburgh began with a service at Windsor. He was accompanied by the Queen and joined by his grandchildren, including Prince Harry. But not many 80-year-olds could expect to see their mother-in-law at such a gathering as well. Princess Margaret looked frail as she entered the church in a wheelchair, the after-effects of her strokes all too evident. 17 of Philip's German relatives were there, as well as one of the biggest contingents from the British royal family in recent times.
It was a large and very distinguished gathering today, yes, and a lot of people with whom he's worked over the years. But it also had a nice kind of informality about it. I mean, and that was something which he very much stressed that he wanted.
As he left the service at St George's Chapel today, the Duke of Edinburgh also looked relaxed, as did his offspring, who know better than most about his legendary sharp wit and equally legendary sharp tongue. Today, though, was his day. At a private reception later, the Queen paid tribute to her husband, saying she couldn't believe Philip was now 80. In reply, he said that the age wasn't the problem, but surviving all the celebrations. Libby Vina, ITN, at Windsor Castle.
Cricket, and there was a nail-biting end to England's first one-day match against Australia today. Australia won it, but not until the last over. Here's Matthew Rumsey.
England's one-day cricketers won the toss at Bristol and elected to bat. Alistair Brown's wicket was the first to fall. He was caught behind off the bowling of Glenn McGrath. 69 runs from Marcus Trescothick and 84 from Nick Knight made up the bulk of England's total. Shane Warne finally removed both men. He ran out Trescothick before dismissing Knight with an acrobatic catch. Alex Stewart was given out leg before the wicket, but a partnership of 70 runs from debutant Oish Shah and Ben Holyoake set Australia the target of 269. Darren Gough made an early breakthrough with the wicket of Adam Gilchrist, but England couldn't stop man of the match Ricky Ponting, who hit 102 runs. England claimed wickets in dramatic style, and the match was decided in the final over. It was captain Steve Waugh that gave Australia victory by 5 wickets. Matthew Rumsey, ITN Sport.
Tennis, and the world #1, Gustavo Kuerten, has won his 3rd French Open title in Paris. The Brazilian beat Spain's Alex Corretja in 4 sets. Kuerten lost the first set on a tie-break, but he recovered to take the next 3 sets. Motor racing in the Canadian Grand Prix was dominated by Germany's Schumacher brothers. For a change, Ralph beat his elder brother Michael, despite starting behind him on the grid. However, Schumacher Sr. still extended his lead at the top of the Drivers' Championship after Britain's David Coulthard suffered an engine blowout with 13 laps to go. And that's the ITV Weekend News. From all of us here at ITN, have a very good night.